Chapter 1. The Vanishing. The village of Kosar was small and quiet, tucked into the folds of the northern mountains, like a secret no one wanted to keep. Its houses were built from stone and mud, roofs pressed low to the earth as though trying to hide from what loomed above them, a jagged cliffside where the black mouth of a cave yawned wide. It was not an ordinary cave. Everyone in Kosar knew that. By day, it looked like nothing more than a hollow in the rock, dark and still. But at night, the villagers swore the cave breathed. They said it exhaled cold winds that smelled of rust and decay. They said if you stood too close, you could hear whispers curling out of the dark, whispers that knew your name. Children were warned never to stray near it. Shepherds guided their flocks around the long way, adding hours to their routes. Men told stories of the cave over fires on cold nights, but no one laughed when the telling was done, because everyone knew the same truth. Those who entered the cave never came back. Rahim was the latest to test that truth. A hunter by trade, Rahim had always mocked the old stories. Ghosts and demons, he'd scoff, are for weak men. He carried a rifle slung across his back and walked with the confidence of someone who had faced wolves and bears without flinching. One night, beneath a pale and watchful moon, he decided he would prove everyone wrong. He told his neighbors he was going inside. He whistled for his dog, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and grinned when they tried to stop him. "There are no spirits," he said. "Tomorrow you'll see." They watched him step into the darkness. At first, there were sounds: his boots crunching against stone, the steady panting of his dog, a faint laugh as he disappeared deeper. Then came a sharp cry, startled, pained, and then silence. Hours passed, then a day, then two. Rahim did not return. On the third day, a group of villagers finally gathered enough courage to approach the cave. They did not enter, but at the mouth, carved deep into the stone, they found something new. The words were fresh, wet, red. He went inside. He will never come out. Some swore it was blood. Others said no human hand could have written it. All agreed on one thing: the cave had claimed him. That night, several villagers woke to a sound drifting through their windows, faint, distant, but unmistakable, Rahim's voice, sometimes calling for help, sometimes screaming, and sometimes laughing. Chapter 2. The warning signs Kosar was never the same after Rahim vanished. By day, the streets were quiet. People worked with their heads down, avoiding one another's eyes, as if speaking too loudly might draw the cave's attention. By night, the village transformed into a fortress. Doors were bolted, windows shuttered. Every home burned lamps, late into the hours, casting trembling shadows on the walls. It was not light they sought. It was protection. But protection against what? It was Pir Gulam, the oldest living soul in Kosar, who dared to answer. He called the villagers to gather beneath the ancient banyan tree, his voice cracked with age but carrying the weight of truth. "This cave," he said, "is older than all of us, older than our fathers and their fathers before them. And every few years it stirs. When it does, it leaves warnings." The crowd leaned in. Mothers clutched their children tighter. "Scratches in the stone," Pir Gulam said. "Blood where no blood was spilled. Voices calling out in the tongues of the dead. These are not stories. These are signs. And when the cave speaks, it is because it hungers again." The villagers shivered. No one spoke. That night, 3 young men decided to test the warnings. Salim, Bashir, and Ilyas armed themselves with torches and crept to the cave's mouth. The first sign appeared at once: scratches. Deep gouges in the rock, raw and jagged, as though someone or something had clawed at the stone itself. The second sign came soon after: carvings, circles within circles, spirals twisting into spirals, and crude faces with hollow eyes. The designs were fresh, the grooves sharp, as though carved only hours before. And then the third sign came. A sound. A bark. Rahim's dog. But it was not a true bark. It was stretched, warped, half laugh, half growl, echoing from every corner of the cave at once. The boys froze. Ilyas dropped his torch. His face turned pale. I can't do this," he stammered. Before bolting back toward the village, Salim and Bashir tried to stand their ground. But as the echo grew louder, deeper, and began to sound almost like words, they fled too. And then as they crossed the fields, a new voice rose from the cave. Not Rahim's, not human. The next one will be mine. Salt and screams at dawn. The villagers revived an old ritual. They carried sacks of salt to the cave and poured it thick across the entrance. Salt, they believed, was the enemy of dark things. But by the next morning, the salt was gone. Not blown away, not washed. Gone. The earth was bare. And that night, the screaming began. Not one scream, not two. Dozens. Men, women, children. Echoing. Out of the cave in voices the villagers recognized, and voices they did not, all screaming the same thing. We are inside, and you will join us. Chapter 3. The Expedition. The news of the cave spread beyond Kosar, as such things always did. Stories have wings, especially when they carry blood and mystery. By the time Rahim's disappearance turned into whispers of screams at night, travelers passing through the region carried the tale further down the mountains, through towns, into cities, and eventually it reached ears far from Pakistan. 3 American men came. They were not soldiers, but their presence carried the same weight. Daniel Carter, 38, a historian and professor from Boston, who had spent his career obsessed with forbidden places around the world, ruins, tombs, and caves that legends swore were cursed. He had sharp eyes behind round glasses and a voice that made everything sound like fact. Mark Hale, 41, a survivalist and ex-Marine from Texas. Broad shoulders, scar across his jaw, a man who trusted steel and gunpowder more than folklore. He had heard about the cave while stationed overseas years ago, and it had burned in his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Ethan Price, 29, a filmmaker from Los Angeles. He came with cameras, drones, microphones, and a dream of producing the documentary that would finally make his name. His faith was in batteries and lenses. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't capture on film. Together, they came to Kosar with backpacks, ropes, rations, and more equipment than the villagers had seen in years. When they walked into the bazaar, heads turned. Conversations stopped. The strangers stood out, tall, fair-skinned, carrying gear that gleamed in the mountain sun. But it wasn't their appearance alone that silenced the villagers. It was their destination. Everyone knew why they were there. The old man's plea. That night, the 3 Americans rented a small room in the guest house near the square. But before they could even unpack, a knock rattled their door. It was Peer Ghulam, the village elder. His bent frame filled the doorway, eyes cloudy with age, but sharp with urgency. He didn't ask permission to enter. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "You must not go," he said immediately, his voice shaking. Daniel adjusted his glasses. "We appreciate your concern, sir, but this is exactly why we've come, to understand, to study." Peer Ghulam leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Understanding will not save you. The cave is not a place of history. It is a mouth, and mouths do only one thing." Ethan smirked, raising his camera to record. "That's incredible. Can you say that again, but slower?" The old man's hand shot out with surprising speed, knocking the camera down. "You think this is a story to tell your people? You think this is a performance?" His voice cracked with sudden fury. Rahim thought the same, and now he is inside it. Screaming, the room fell silent. Mark finally spoke, his Texan drawl cutting through the tension. "Listen, old man, I've been through wars. I've seen men blown to pieces and still crawling forward. You can't scare me with ghost stories. If there's something in that cave, I'll kill it." Pir Gulam's gaze fixed on him. "You cannot kill what is older than death." And with that, the old man turned and left, leaving only the faint smell of incense and the heavy weight of his warning. The first signs. The next morning, the Americans prepared to scout the cave. Ethan filmed everything, the children staring. From doorways, the women whispering behind shawls, the men shaking their heads as the strangers passed. Daniel scribbled notes about ritual protections as he saw villagers scatter salt along their rooftops. He wrote down the carved warnings near the banyan tree. Every detail was evidence to him, proof of folklore colliding with reality. Mark walked with his rifle slung, eyes scanning the cliffs. "These people are just scared," he muttered. Fear makes things real when they ain't. But when they reached the cave mouth, the air itself seemed different. The wind died. The mountain birds fell silent. The sun above dimmed, as though a thin veil of cloud had slipped across it. The entrance loomed before them, a jagged gash in the cliff, wider than a man could stretch his arms, taller than two men standing on each other's shoulders. The rock around it was scarred as though something enormous had clawed its way out centuries ago. Daniel adjusted his glasses, whispering, "Remarkable." Ethan zoomed in with his camera, grinning. "Perfect shot." Mark stepped forward, spitting, into the dirt. "Just a hole in the rock." But then, a voice drifted out. So faint, they almost thought it was the wind. "Help me." Ethan's eyes went wide. "Did you get that?" Daniel froze. That was English." Mark's jaw tightened. His hand went to his rifle. "No." His voice was low. "That was a trap. The pull of the dark. They should have left then. They should have turned back, boarded a jeep, and never looked over their shoulders. But that is not what men like them did, because the cave was not just stone and shadow. It was a predator. It knew what bait to use, and it had just set the hook. And so, as the villagers locked their doors and prayed under their breath, 3 Americans stepped closer to the darkness, closer to the mouth that was waiting to swallow them whole. Chapter 4. Into the mouth of darkness. The cave's breath met them first. It was not the cold, stale air of forgotten stone, but a living exhalation, wet, heavy, almost warm. It carried with it a scent so foul that Ethan lowered his camera and gagged. "Jesus Christ, it smells like something died in there." Mark squatted at the entrance, fingers brushing the dirt. "Not something," he muttered. "A lot of somethings." Daniel, meanwhile, looked enthralled. His notebook was already open. The villagers believe this place predates human settlement. They call it the Sayagar, the House of Shadows. According to their stories, it doesn't keep things buried. It keeps them fed. Yeah, Mark growled, shouldering his rifle. "You keep writing your fairy tales, Professor. I'll keep us alive." Crossing the threshold, the 3 men stepped inside. Immediately, the sunlight seemed to die behind them, as though the cave swallowed the day whole. Their headlamps flicked on, thin beams slicing through thick blackness. The walls glistened as though wet, though no water dripped. Instead, the stone looked as if it had been licked smooth. "Notice the carvings?" Daniel whispered, tracing, his light along symbols etched deep into the walls. Crude human figures, bound and kneeling, towering shapes above them, formless yet sharp. These aren't random. They're warnings, ritual depictions. This isn't natural. It was worship. Ethan panned his camera across the etchings, whispering, "Gold mine. This is absolute gold." Mark shook his head. "Gold mine? More like a goddamn grave." The first sound, they walked deeper. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, like the cave was amplifying each sound, feeding it back a fraction louder. Then, something answered. A scrape, faint but deliberate, further inside the tunnel, like nails dragging across stone. Ethan froze, swinging his camera around. "Did you hear that?" Mark raised his rifle. "Position!" His training took over. He moved to the front, scanning the tunnel ahead while the others huddled behind. "Stay tight." Daniel frowned, his voice barely audible. "It could be an animal." "No animal I ever hunted makes that sound," Mark snapped. The scraping stopped, and then, from deep inside the cave, came a whisper. "Daniel." The professor's blood turned to ice. His headlamp jerked as he whipped toward the darkness. "What? What the hell? Did you hear that?" Mark's jaw tightened. "It said your name." Ethan was shaking now, the camera trembling in his hands. "No, no, 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 that's not possible. That's not possible. Nobody even knows us here." The cave was silent again. Too silent. The chamber. They pressed on, though their instincts screamed otherwise. Finally, the tunnel widened into a vast chamber. Their headlamps couldn't reach the ceiling. It simply vanished into black. Stalactites hung like teeth, dripping with moisture that gleamed like saliva. In the center of the chamber was a circle of stones. But these were no ordinary rocks. They were arranged deliberately, each one smeared with long-dried blood. Inside the circle lay scraps of fabric, bones, and what looked disturbingly like the remains of claw marks etched in every direction, as though something had tried to crawl out. Daniel crouched, breathless. This is ritual containment. They were holding something here. Ethan zoomed his lens in, whispering like he was afraid the stone itself might hear him. Holy shit, this is insane!" Mark kept his rifle raised. "Containment? Great! So where the hell is it now?" The impossible scream. Before anyone could answer, the chamber filled with a sound so sharp, so inhuman, it pierced bone. Scream! But it wasn't coming from ahead of them. It was coming from behind. The three men spun around, headlamps slashing across the stone corridor they had just come through. The passage was empty, yet the scream persisted, long, shrill, and impossibly layered like 1,000 voices shrieking in unison. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure. The vibration rattled their teeth, clawed at their skulls, made their eyes water blood. Ethan dropped his camera, clutching his ears. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Mark grabbed his shoulder and dragged him back toward the stone circle. "Stay together! Don't break!" Daniel, white as a corpse, shouted over the cacophony. "It's not behind us! It's inside the cave! Itself!" And then, as suddenly as it began, silence. Total, crushing silence, the realization. The three men stood panting, staring into the dark. Their lamps flickered faintly, batteries draining far too fast. Ethan bent down to retrieve his camera. The screen was cracked, but it had kept recording. He replayed the last 30 seconds. The footage showed them standing in the chamber, backs turned toward the tunnel. The sound of the scream filled the audio, violent and jagged. But the strange part wasn't what they heard. It was what the camera saw. Behind them, standing just at the edge of the light, was a figure. Impossible. A man. His face twisted in silent agony. His arms torn open, his eyes wide with terror. Daniel whispered, voice trembling. "That's Rahim." Ethan dropped the camera again, because the screen was still playing, and Rahim's figure was no longer behind them in the recording. It was standing behind them right now. Chapter 5. The first contact Ethan's hands shook violently as the camera flickered on the stone floor, its cracked screen painting the chamber with ghostly light. On the display, Rahim's face stared back at them, eyes hollow, lips torn, his jaw hanging unnaturally loose as though broken. His mouth moved, but no sound came through. Mark swallowed hard, rifle raised. "That's impossible! He's dead!" Daniel's voice was no more than a breath. "Not dead, not alive, something's wearing him." The screen glitched, static, cutting through Rahim's face, and then his body shifted. Not in the recording, but in the room itself. The shadow peeled out of the camera, crawling onto the stone floor like a projection made flesh. The chamber seemed to shrink around them. The air thickened, pressing against their lungs. Ethan stumbled back, whispering, "It's not him! It's not him! It's not!" Rahim's figure snapped its head upward with a crack, fixing them with eyes that gleamed like wet bone. The jaw that had once been human stretched open far too wide until the scream they'd heard earlier burst out again. Only this time, it wasn't inside the cave. It was right in front of them. Mark fired. The gunshot echoed like thunder in the enclosed chamber. Sparks burst from the stone as the bullet tore through Rahim's body. Yet the thing did not fall. Instead, its outline rippled, flickered, as though reality itself couldn't fully contain. Daniel clutched his notebook, eyes wide with horror. "We need to leave, now!" But as the echoes of the gunshot faded, they realized something far worse. The scream had awakened the cave. All around them, in the walls, the ceiling, the floor, other whispers began to stir. Chapter 6. The living walls. The echoes of Mark's rifle shot rolled endlessly through the cave, bouncing back in ways that no sound should. It didn't just echo, it multiplied, twisting into voices. "You shouldn't have come. One becomes many. Many becomes one." The chamber trembled as fine dust rained down from the ceiling. Ethan's flashlight beam cut across the rock, and his heart seized. The walls were moving. At first, it looked like shadows shifting. Then, slowly, the truth emerged. Human faces, hundreds of them, pressed into the stone like clay. Some with eyes wide open, some with mouths frozen mid-scream, some silently mouthing words they couldn't hear. Their cheeks bulged outward, as if trying to push through from the inside. Daniel gasped, stumbling backward. "Oh God, it's the others! Everyone who went missing, Rahim, the villagers, they're inside the cave." Mark spun, keeping his rifle up. "No, that's not possible. Stone doesn't move." But it did. The nearest face opened its mouth and expelled a choking gust of air that carried with it the stink of rot. Ethan gagged, clutching his stomach as more faces twisted out of the rock, reaching, biting, clawing. Their fingernails were stone, sharp as knives. The Americans fired wildly, bullets sparking off the walls. Each shot tore away part of a face, but the rock only healed, reshaping, new faces appearing where the old ones had been destroyed. The cave was rebuilding itself. Daniel's notebook slipped from his trembling hands, falling open on the ground. His eyes darted to a scrawled passage he'd copied from a villager's warning. "The cave does not take lives. It absorbs them." Suddenly, the whispers became screams. Hundreds of voices, all shouting in unison, flooding their ears until it felt like their skulls would crack. And through the chaos, Rahim's distorted voice rose above the rest, chilling and triumphant. "You can't kill what isn't alive." Walls lurched inward. The chamber was closing. Ethan shouted, "It's trying to trap us! Run!" They bolted down a narrow passage, the faces in the stone shrieking as they brushed past, clawing at their clothes, trying to pull them in. Behind them, the chamber sealed itself shut, and the cave, hungry, awake, and aware, began to chase them. Chapter 7. The maze that hunts their boots pounded against the uneven stone floor as they sprinted down the narrowing passage. The beams of their flashlights jittered wildly, cutting through the darkness in fractured cones. But no matter how far, they ran. The whispers followed. Not from behind, from inside their heads. Ethan staggered mid-run, clutching his helmet. "Stop it! Get out of my head!" Mark yanked him forward. "Don't listen! Keep moving!" The passage forked suddenly into 3 tunnels. Without thinking, Daniel pointed left. "This way!" They barreled into the dark corridor, but halfway through, Ethan froze. His flashlight beam illuminated something scratched into the wall with bloody fingernails. "I chose this path. Don't." Before he could warn the others, the rock beneath his boots softened, like wet clay. Ethan screamed as his foot sank into the floor. The stone clamped shut around his ankle like jaws, pulling him down. Mark and Daniel grabbed his arms, straining. "Hold on! Don't let it take you!" Ethan shrieked as more faces swelled out of the ground, mouths opening, sucking at his leg. Their teeth were stone, their tongues black voids. Daniel swung his flashlight down, shouting prayers he didn't even believe. For an instant, the beam cut through the illusions. The faces flickered, and Ethan's leg came free. They dragged him up, stumbling forward again. But Ethan's pant leg was shredded, his skin covered in bruised, hand-shaped burns. As they caught their breath, Mark noticed something worse. The tunnels behind them had vanished, seamlessly sealed into solid stone. There was no way back. The whispers returned, softer now, almost coaxing. "One of you must stay. Only then will the others leave." Daniel's throat tightened. "It's toying with us, making us choose." And then the tunnel ahead split again, this time into 5, each mouth of stone breathing like a living throat, waiting for them to enter. The cave wasn't just hunting them anymore. It was hurting them. Chapter 8. The Choice That Wasn't Theirs. The 5 tunnels loomed before them, each breathing with a slow, unnatural rhythm. The stone walls pulsed like veins beneath skin, alive with a heartbeat that wasn't theirs. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes wild. "It wants us to choose wrong. That's the trick." Mark shook his head. "No, it doesn't matter. What we pick. Every way is a trap." But Daniel's flashlight beam wavered over one passage. His chest tightened. Down that tunnel, he swore he saw something impossible. His sister standing barefoot in the glow, her hair tangled, her lips whispering his name. "Danny?" His knees buckled. He hadn't seen her since before Iraq. She was supposed to be safe halfway across the world. "Daniel," Mark hissed, "what are you looking at?" Daniel blinked, trying to speak, but his throat locked. The image of his sister stretched out a hand. "Come with me, it's safe." Mark turned his light. Nothing was there, only stone. The cave was inside their heads now, whispering their most vulnerable truths. Ethan's breath hitched. "Mom?" His flashlight flicked to another tunnel and his face crumpled. She's waiting for me." "I hear her voice," Mark barked. "It's lies! Don't listen!" But the cave didn't care about truth. It cared about weakness. The air thickened, the walls closing, forcing them toward the tunnels. The whispers rose to screams, overlapping. "Pick! Pick! Pick!" Mark grabbed Daniel by the collar. Don't you dare go down there." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. What if it's real?" And then, before Mark could stop him, Ethan broke. With a sob, he tore free and sprinted down the tunnel where the voice of his mother called, "Ethan!" Mark and Daniel shouted in unison. They chased him, but the cave shifted with a violent shudder. The floor split like a wound slamming a wall, of stone between them. The last thing they heard was Ethan's scream, cut off suddenly as though swallowed whole. The cave had chosen. Chapter 9. The Price of Looking Back. The moment the stone slammed shut, Ethan's scream still echoed in the high, dark bouncing endlessly inside the narrow passage. But he wasn't alone anymore. The voice that had lured him here, the soft, familiar call of his mother, had gone quiet. What replaced it was a heavy silence, thick enough to feel like pressure on his chest. He stumbled forward, flashlight trembling, in his grip. "Mom?" His voice cracked. "Where are you?" The beam cut across the walls and his stomach lurched. The rock wasn't rock anymore. It rippled, like wet clay. And within it, shapes moved. Faces pressed outward, twisted and stretched, their mouths opening in silent screams. One face shoved forward more than the others, snapping open its stone eyelids. It wasn't his mother. It was Rahim. His lips peeled back in a grin too wide for his face. "She's here, Ethan, but you'll have to come closer to see her." Ethan stumbled back, his boot striking bone. He looked down. Half-buried skeletons littered the floor, their jaws cracked wide as if still screaming when death took them. His flashlight flickered across hundreds of them, some so fresh they still wore scraps of tattered uniforms. American, British, villagers, all the missing people, all absorbed. Ethan gagged, bile rising in his throat. No, this isn't real." The cave answered with a chorus of voices, all speaking in unison, thousands layered over each other until the sound vibrated through his bones. "Everything is real once it is inside." The floor heaved beneath him. Before Ethan could react, the ground split open and arms, dozens, maybe hundreds, shot up from the stone. Not flesh, not bone, but stone arms with fingers like knives. They clawed at him, slicing through his uniform, dragging him down. He screamed, blasting his rifle into the ground, sparks flying as bullets ricocheted uselessly off the living rock. And then he saw her, his mother, standing just beyond the reach of his flashlight, her face soft, warm, glowing. She opened her arms. "Come home, Ethan," he cried, tears blurring his vision. "Mom, please help me." She smiled, stepping closer. And as she did, her face melted. The warmth vanished, her skin sloughing off like wet clay. What stood before him was a hollow-eyed figure with a mouth that unhinged wider and wider, stretching into the shape of a black cavern. The whispers surged. One becomes many. Many becomes one. The arms yanked Ethan down, into the floor, into the wall. His scream tore through the tunnel, cut short as his face was pulled into the stone, pressed flat, becoming another screaming mask among the countless others. And then silence. Only the echo of his last cry lingered. On the other side of the sealed wall, Mark and Daniel stood in the darkness, pale and shaking. Daniel whispered, "Did you hear that?" Mark's jaw clenched. His voice was low, steady, but filled with dread. "He's gone." But even as he said it, both men froze. Because from the stone beside them, a face began to push through. And it was Ethan. His mouth opened in a broken scream, begging them not to let the same fate happen to them. Chapter 10. The Cave. Never Forgets. Mark shoved Daniel backward, his flashlight beam trembling as Ethan's twisted face bulged from the wall, begging silently with eyes that were no longer his own. "Don't." "Look!" Mark barked, grabbing Daniel's arm. "It isn't him anymore!" But Daniel's voice cracked, raw with grief. "It is! He's still in there! We can pull him out!" The stone face of Ethan twisted, lips moving, though no sound came out. His mouth formed one clear word: "Run!" The wall convulsed, shattering with a wet crack. Dozens of arms burst out, clawing for them. Some were small, childlike, others were thick and jagged like stone spears. They moved with the fury of the damned. Mark fired his rifle until it clicked. Empty, sparks flying, the chamber filling with smoke. The bullets shredded arms, but the stone simply closed, reformed, and sprouted more. The cave was alive, hungering. Daniel screamed as one arm slashed across his chest, knocking him flat. His flashlight skidded across the ground, casting wild beams up the ceiling, where faces writhed in the rock, chanting in whispers that shook the men's bones. One becomes many, many becomes one. Mark dragged Daniel to his feet, adrenaline, burning away all hesitation. Move! Now! They sprinted, lungs burning deeper into the twisting passageways. The cave seemed to stretch endlessly, every turn leading to another fork, every wall dripping with whispers. Their boots splashed through black water that stank of rot. Behind them, the stone groaned. It was following. Daniel coughed blood, his steps faltering. "Mark, I can't—" "Shut up and keep going!" Mark snapped, dragging him by the vest. "You stop! You die!" They stumbled into a vast chamber lit by an eerie blue glow. At its center lay a pit, a yawning hole that pulsed like a beating heart. From its depths, hot air roared upward, carrying the stench of centuries of death. Daniel froze. "We can't go that way!" The walls screamed, and hundreds of arms tore free around them, reaching, writhing, pushing them closer to the pit. Mark's mind raced. No exit, no light, just the abyss. The voices rose into a deafening chorus. "Join us! Join us! Join us!" Daniel sobbed, clutching his chest wound. "Mark, we're not getting out." Mark's eyes locked on the pit. Maybe it was death. Maybe it was escape. But staying meant being eaten alive by stone. He grabbed Daniel's arm, hauling him toward the edge. "Then we choose our way out, Leobor." Ground split open, the chamber collapsing as faces shrieked from every wall. Arms lashed at them, tearing flesh, ripping cloth. With one last cry, Mark and Daniel threw themselves into the abyss. The blue glow swallowed them. The pit closed, and the cave went silent. Weeks later, a new team of hikers would stumble upon the cave's entrance. The same warning scratched into the stone, barely visible under moss and dust. The last person who entered this cave never returned. But below, in the walls, two new faces had joined the countless others. Mark, Daniel, their mouths frozen in eternal screams. The cave had claimed them, as it always did, and it was waiting for the next.